Hello and welcome. With us today is Christie Cioffi, West Point graduate and former U.S. Army officer with 2 combat deployments where she was awarded a Bronze Star. She switched to the biotech marketing after earning her MBA and then rose to become a vice president before she decided to switch over to become an empowerment ambassador where she coaches CEOs and high performers to elevate their confidence and impact in the world. She is a breast cancer survivor, she is an author, and she is a keynote speaker. Christie, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Brett.
We're happy to have you here. So can you give us a bit of an overview of what you do today? I just read like a brief overview, but can you give us an understanding of what that is?
Yes. So as you mentioned, I am a bit of a career transitioner. I'm on my 3rd type of career, and this is all about me following my heart and my passion for giving back to others. So I transitioned out of the biotech space from doing about 12 years in marketing and rising up levels to now focusing on helping individuals. So people step into their own confidence and abilities as a leader to make a greater impact for the organization and those around them, but then also to support more senior level individuals, specifically in the biotech space. So we're talking strategic advising to C-suite and CEOs around their culture shifts that they're trying to make, around organizational planning and business planning, and even strategy, because my emphasis in the biotech space has been on marketing and strategy. So I'm doing that now. I've just started the pivot in the beginning of 2024, and it's been really rewarding so far, and seeing the impact that my coaching is helping individuals really step into their own, and very, very happy I've made this career change.
So that's awesome. What got you started down that path from you went Army into biotech and now leadership coaching, essentially? What got you started there?
Yeah, well, there are actually a lot of people who go from the military straight into leadership coaching. And I'll just make that connection first, because, I have people who say, hey, Christie, now that you're doing coaching, have you ever thought about going and getting a leadership certification? But I went to West Point, and that's where you learn to be a follower, and then you learn to be a leader. So I'm proud to have learned the fundamentals of leadership and then put it into action while being at West Point, but then also taking that into my 5 years when I served as an officer. So for me, my leadership certification and training started at West Point and was then proven in combat. I like to say that then my leadership was also demonstrated in my career in the biotech space. So just like any other career profession, if you're rising up the ranks and, going from an individual contributor to a manager and a leader, you've got to take the time to learn how to be a leader, what leadership means. And so I was very fortunate to have very early in my career, while I was at school in my undergrad, those fundamentals, and then applying them early in my career. So for me to now be an empowerment ambassador, to be working with individuals and senior managers and senior leaders, it's a connecting of the dots, if you will, of the leadership I learned and then the industry that I spent over a decade operating in different capacities with marketing and strategy. So it's pretty natural for me, but that's because leadership has been the red thread throughout that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And obviously my wife is also an Army officer, so I can see where that would go. And I would also see the connection with the marketing. It was marketing, correct?
Marketing,
I
correct?
didn't just do blank. Yeah, I've heard it said that if you're in business, you're in marketing, or if you're a leader, you're in marketing, because that's such a huge part of the job. But I'd like to rewind the clock a little bit, even further back to what drew you into becoming an Army officer? You talked about your leadership experience and how that led you to coaching, but there had to have been something inside you that led you to become a leader in the first place. What was it?
Yeah. Oh man, so many people have asked me that, even for the past since I graduated from West Point. What made you want to go to West Point? And I honestly don't know the answer. There isn't like one thing. I have an older brother. He's 3 years older. He went to West Point. So I was fortunate growing up outside New York City, and West Point is up the Hudson River about an hour. I was able to visit West Point and learn about it before I had to make my decision on what college I wanted to go to. And I have an identical twin sister, and I think she knows your wife. That's how we kind of got connected. But so my sister and I, pretty much independently, but also together, we realized that going to West Point made sense for us. It was just something, it fit, right? Sometimes you just know. And like many people, they go and they visit different colleges and they feel there's a fit for this college, or they play a sport and it just feels right. Going to West Point felt right for me, but there's no one specific thing. But I do remember as I went to West Point and as I was there thinking, what am I getting out of this and where do I want to go with my life? I definitely wanted to be able to give back to my country. I felt this, patriotic calling, and this was before 9/11. So it wasn't that we all thought we were going to be going off to war. This wasn't, it wasn't kind of, it was possible, but it wasn't super likely. So 9/11 happened when I was at West Point, and then we all took our oaths after 9/11 to stay and, serve the 5 years after. So by that point at West Point, I just knew that giving back to the country was something I wanted to do, but I also wanted to further ingrain, a sense of discipline and purpose with whatever it was I was doing. And having that sort of structure and that drive at West Point was very appealing to me. So, and then the third was I kind of wanted to, put off, if you will, the decision of what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So when you go to West Point, just like if you do ROTC at another college, you serve after you graduate from college. So for West Point, we served 5 years. And so that meant I would be serving in the Army for 5 years, and I could put off what it is I was going to do with the rest of my life. And honestly, I went to West Point at 17 years old. That appealed to me because I didn't know what I wanted to be. And if you look, it seems like every 10 years I'm changing my career. So that worked out for me. So there's no one thing, but it felt like a calling. It felt like it was right for a few different reasons.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I also am an Air Force veteran, although I was on the enlisted side of things, and I can relate to both of those reasons that you mentioned. I think you might have mentioned 3 reasons, but the 2 of the reasons that stood out to me was the patriotic sense of like wanting to serve, wanting to do something good to give back for your country, and then the other part of it is, like you said, like I have no idea what to do with my life. This is a good thing to do while I figure it out. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So did you have people in your family who were served prior to you?
So grandfathers, my grandfather on my mother's side was in the Battle of the Bulge and in decades before, but there was nobody really recent or in our immediate family. So my brother going was definitely paving the way for my sister and I to even learn about West Point and learn about this possible path. I like to joke that my parents put something in the water because they had 3 kids and all 3 of us ended up going to West Point. So how lucky were they? They didn't have to pay for college, but it's probably a combination of, how we were raised and, I don't know, nurture, nature. I don't know how much of it was a mix, but I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to join the military. It never occurred to me until I was a freshman in high school.
So I'd like to focus a little bit on what you said about learning first to follow and then to lead while you were at West Point. Tell us more about what life was like for you there, what the training was like for you there, and kind of specifically focused on those 2 things. What were some things that taught you how to follow well, and then what were some things that taught you how to lead well?
Yes. And maybe we'll also circle back because what I learned in this time became something I had to relearn when I got out of the Army and I transitioned into the biotech space. So West Point is all about creating the next generation of leaders of our country. And of course, you have to serve for 5 years, but many people from there go on to serve the country in different ways, whether that's through political positions that they run for, or go start their own companies and do things like that. So a whole generation of leaders is coming out of West Point. But the principle that West Point follows as far as leadership and building strong leaders is first ensuring that you know how to follow. So, for anybody who's a leader in an organization today, chances are, unless they founded that company themselves and grew it from there, they were likely an individual contributor somewhere in the beginning of their career. And being an individual contributor is actually, you're learning how to work well with others, how to collaborate and find common ground with others so you can achieve your shared goals. And so West Point, when you are what's called a plebe, it's your first year, you're this new cadet, and then you're this plebe cadet, you are at the bottom of this totem pole where you don't really have a voice, you don't really have an identity, but you build very, very strong camaraderie with those around you, with your fellow plebes. So you are kind of stripped of that identity and who you are in order to kind of, I guess, have the right clean slate from which you can learn how to be an effective team player, but then also learn to lead. So you learn to follow and then you learn to lead. And as you go through West Point, you have different levels of responsibility that you step into, and you're coached through that. So you're coached by an upperclassman who's been in your shoes, and they kind of help build you up. So it's a little breaking you down, but then there's building you up and creating the toolbox that you will pull from for, your entire career in the military and any other careers as it relates to your leadership.
So what would you say was one of the most important lessons that you learned in being a follower while you were there?
Oh gosh, being a follower, it's a bit of, it's tough. It's you have a lot of ego that gets peeled back, especially if you did really well in high school. I went to a pretty small high school, but I did really well in sports, and everybody knows everybody. And I had a twin sister, and I still have a twin sister, but everybody could tell us apart in high school. And you get to West Point, and it's, not only are people mixing my sister and I up, and we're getting yelled at because people thought I was her and I wasn't greeting them or saying the right thing to them, because you have to greet people in different ways based on whether or not you know them, and all these, it was a mess. And so it was just, to not have an identity in a way, to wear a uniform. And as a woman, a lot of these uniforms don't fit women well. They're uncomfortable for anybody, but for women, they just are not flattering. They don't fit you well. I have my hair down now, but you have your hair back. You have no, little makeup. You don't have earrings. You have nail polish. I mean, I have blue nail polish on today, unheard of. So you not only don't really have an identity, but you don't really have a form of expression. And I am a highly expressive person, maybe as you can tell of all the hand, signals I'm making over here, and you don't have that. So there's a part of who I was naturally that when you learn to follow kind of gets suppressed or put on the back burner. And that is a big lesson. It's not like they tell you this is going to happen. It happens over time. And that's tough for anybody who, I don't know, has not ever, done that. So yeah, that's a long way of saying learning to follow when you have a sense of who you are, and it requires you stripping away that identity is really tough, but you gain it back over time. You do get it back.
And you build it in a way that is is shaped by that culture. So you get stripped, and you have this starting point that everyone else starts at. and then you kind of learn to redefine yourself within that culture. Would you say that was correct?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great way of saying it, because you're also learning within this culture what success looks like. So you are able to watch and mirror the upperclassmen ahead of you at West Point when you're an officer and enlisted anywhere in whatever military branch. You're seeing, because you've got a very defined structure and an authority, you know where your career path could go if you stick with it, if you want to keep going on it. But you also have individuals that you can emulate, and you know what's rewarded and what's not, because things are very, fairly well structured. So success at West Point and then in the Army, you know what not to do and you know what you should do, and those things are rewarded, or you receive discipline for it, and so that's very clear. But when you get in, when I transitioned to the corporate world, it's not as clear. And so as confident and as secure as I became after I was a follower and I had my kind of ego stripped a bit and redefine myself, learn to be successful, I then had to be a follower in the corporate space, which was almost a whole situation, which I know we'll probably go into here.
Yeah, it was. I can only imagine it. In a sense, it was having to do that all over again, where you're breaking yourself down, entering a new culture, and kind of learning to build yourself back up with perhaps taking what you've learned, but you still kind of have to start over. I'd love to get into that. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about your transition into leadership after that, and then what that looked like when you were actually serving either overseas or stateside, whatever that was. And what was that transition into leadership like, and what were some of the lessons that you began to learn as you served over the years?
Yeah. So when you come out of West Point, you are a second lieutenant, like any other commissioning source. But so you are immediately a leader. There isn't necessarily a transition into it. You just are. And so I was 21 years old, and I'm a second lieutenant. By the time I was 22, we were already getting ready to deploy for my first deployment. And it was, I think I had just turned 23, and I was put into this role, which I would define as my most robust, really condensed learning experience as a leader. So I was a logistics officer, quartermaster officer, but I was placed in a specific role for our unit in this first deployment, which is in the Baghdad area. I was a gun truck platoon leader. So these roles that role doesn't exist in a non-combat unit. It didn't exist stateside. So it was created to support the mission when we were in Iraq. And so when we're training for just over a year between, when I was started to be commissioned and getting ready for deployment, it was about a year of training. The things that I ultimately had to do as a leader in Iraq, they didn't totally match up. So there was a lot of on-the-job training, and I had a platoon of 40 soldiers, and we went out on the roads every day doing all sorts of various missions, from providing security for checkpoints being built up, to taking Iraqi soldiers who just finished their training from northern Baghdad all the way through Baghdad to the other side, and a handoff to Marines. I mean, it was every day it was something different. And so but I was ultimately in charge. By that time I was a first lieutenant. I'm in charge of all 40 of these soldiers. And the training that we were all receiving was very much on the job, because the landscape, the warfare used against us was constantly evolving, as was our equipment to protect ourselves. So that was, I've yet to have a tougher leadership experience than that role as a first lieutenant in the Army. Just nothing has compared to that.
Sounds almost literally trial by fire, because like you were in there, in the zone, in the words escaping me. There's literally shots being fired as you were learning to lead, and a group of 40 soldiers. That's no small group, especially for someone who's just jumping into it as a 23-year-old. It's incredible. So what would you say the biggest thing that you learned while you were in the war zone learning how to lead under fire these 40 people that you were leading, and learning to read the situation, adjust, do all these different things. You said you were a logistics officer, so I assume you had to do that on top of what you're doing when you were out and about. What were some of the lessons that you had to learn in order to survive and thrive in that environment?
Yeah, the biggest lesson I would say is to trust yourself, to learn. People talk about, oh, trust your gut. And I was always thinking, why would I listen to my digestive tract to make decisions? But there's actually science now that I've learned that talks about how your gut is tied to your brain. And I'm not going to get into all that because I'm not going to speak well on that matter. But it's ultimately your intuition and recognizing when something just doesn't feel right. And so I'd say one of my, where I earned a combat action badge was a specific time. It was the anniversary of 9/11 in 2006, and my platoon and we were tasked to go on what I thought was a needless mission. It was going to be 3 hours on the roads up north, and it was the anniversary of 9/11, so the intel was very strong. Our U.S. intel, our coalition intel said, don't go out on the roads unless you absolutely have to. But the head of our entire unit said, you must go out. And I remember fighting that and saying, this doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be going out. We should be doing this the next day. This mission delayed 24 hours will not impact anything. And was still given the order to go. And so, you learn to follow, you learn to lead. I was I have to follow. I'm being given a direct order. We've got to go. And so we went on this mission. But I should also say, where my intuition really was speaking up to me was I was getting the intel brief before I went out from the intel officer. This is what this person did every day, was read the intel reports and share the maps with me. And we were going 3 hours north, which we had not done before. We usually stayed in the general area, like within an hour of Baghdad. And I remember looking at the map and thinking, if we're going up and something happens at this point on the road and this base camp is here, like this map actually says it's up I remember just looking and saying these two maps contradict of where we would need to go if something happened. And you always have to have those contingency plans. And I just remember thinking, oh, it'll be fine. Well, turns out we got hit on the roads, on the main road between those two exit points. And so I still think about that and think about how lucky I was to be able to, maneuver us out of there, because my second in command was in a vehicle that was hit. And so I had to do his role, which was, the highest ranking enlisted officer's job, as well as the officer's job. And so all these things are happening. And I just was like, holy cow, the thing I knew that didn't seem right on my intel report, I ignored. And so I reflect on that a lot. I mean, not a lot, but I mean, it's many years later, but I still reflect on that. And I am so grateful that it worked out okay, because I was able to get us I made the right choice, and I got us to that base camp to take care of everything, the disabled equipment, the soldier had to go into surgery and all of this, and we were okay. But the thing is, we know when something doesn't quite feel right. And when you're serving in the military, it's often life or death. And that certainly is not the case since then, right? I mean, we all have life or death decisions, maybe, in our daily lives, but in the corporate world, it's not like that, in what I do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in charge of anybody's lives, but that was a very important learning. And I've continued to grow and trust my own intuition and know something seems right or something doesn't seem right, and I need to investigate that further. So I wish I had investigated that further, because that's what I was trying to tell myself. And it worked out okay. It was okay in the end. But yeah,
But lesson learned, dig
Mhm.
into it deeper if you get a red flag, something pop up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that you guys made it. And was it kind of just by chance you happened to pick the right way to go, or did you learn something later that told you which way to go after it was hit?
So I remember because I was still watching my maps. We had our digital map, we had our printed maps. This was 2006, so that was the kind of technology that existed. And I remember being at that point. I remember because I was watching the map and I go, okay, if this is the exit, because that was my job, was to know where we would go if something were to happen. And there was a light of some sort, like a glow stick was thrown on the side where there was a road. And so that was clearly thrown down by coalition forces, by probably US forces. And so I just remember thinking, okay, that's a sign that that's the exit to that base camp. And so there was a couple miles up the road where we were ambushed with roadside bombs, and then fire from both sides. Vehicle was disabled. We had injured. So to me, I went back to, okay, I don't know what's ahead. There could be another ambush ahead, or we go back to where that glow stick is on the ground, because that is the best approach that I have. And we came from there, so it's most likely clear still. So we turned around and went back, and and it turned out to be the right decision. But it was like piecing together, and paying attention and being aware. That's what I was trained to do, was to be aware and pick up on those types of things. So yeah, it's a lot of luck, right? A lot of luck helped.
I think it's also really important what you said about intuition and learning to trust your gut, because part of that, and I know there's more to it than that, but from what I have seen, a lot of that is learning to trust your intuition, in that you pick up little hints here and there, you pick up little clues here and there about what is true and what is right, what would be the right choice to do. But your conscious brain is usually focused on one thing, the thing right in front of you, and so it's usually not paying attention to all those little clues. But just taking time to ask yourself the question, and then paying attention to what your intuition is picking up on, what your subconscious is picking up on. I know intuition might be more than that. We can talk about that later if we want. But and then one of the things that I've learned to basically trust is, if something pops into my head out of nowhere and it's not like, I might not have registered the fact that I saw that sign 3 minutes ago, but I'm paying attention to the fact that I remember that sign. I don't know where I saw it, but it must have been a few minutes ago. And then when it comes time, trusting that, okay, I have all the clues. I'm going to trust my gut. I'm going to trust my intuition to put all the pieces together, and then turn and make a decision and go. And it sounds like a lot of what you were doing, you were kind of collecting these pieces, paying attention enough to pick up on the pieces. And then when it came time to go, you're like, okay, this is what my intuition says, we're going to go. Does that sound like similar to what you went?
Yes, definitely. I think also you've got to make a decision, right? I couldn't not make a decision. And I could go forward with the unknown, or I could go backwards where, there was, based on my Intel map I had, that there's a 50% chance that was the right exit. And so, yeah, you sometimes you just have to make a decision. You have to go off of the best information that you have. I'll even tie that to the corporate world. There's so many of us that are part of organizations at one time or another that they have, it's called paralysis by analysis, right? Like, they're just looking at data, especially in the marketing side in biotech, you're working with your sales and sales ops partners, and you're looking at data, and you could look at data 100 million different ways. And at some point, you just have to recognize that you may not have all the answers you're looking for, but you've got to make the most educated decision and accept that there is some risk with it. But also trust that you and those around you are knowledgeable and qualified, and that you're all, especially, capable of making the right decision. Even if you're the leader, or if you're part of the team, that those decisions can be made even when you don't have all of the info. And I think that's, while my experience in the Army for me was a very drastic example of that. It teaches you to the importance of paying attention to what's around you, but also, when you make a decision, make the decision, and then go with it. And maybe there are other decisions you might have to make if you made the wrong one, right? But you don't know until you start going down that path.
I think that's definitely something that is worth digging into in that I think a lot of us, unless you were specifically trained to lead, as is in your case, where you literally went to West Point and were taught how to lead in these different ways, a lot of us were trained to do the opposite in a way, where whether it's throughout our childhood, we're told to listen to our elders, listen to our parents, listen to our teachers, listen. And then when you're in school, you're taking tests, there's always a right answer. You're always being tested on trying to find the right answer. And then when you get into these real life situations, a lot of that paralysis by analysis, I think, comes from when we've been taught that there's always a right answer and it's your job to find the right answer. But it sounds like what you're saying is that that's not usually the case in the real world, where it sounds like you're saying sometimes you just have to make a decision and then roll with it. Is that what you're saying? Or talk about that a bit more.
No, I mean, I do agree with that. I do think, I don't know if there are right answers and wrong answers. I actually, as I'm on my own continuous journey and, of self-discovery, but also of coming from a place of, trying to find compassion for somebody who may have a very different perspective than me. I've actually found that everybody has their own perspective and they can hold that perspective very strongly. And maybe somebody else doesn't have as strong a perspective on the same topic. It doesn't mean that the person who feels more strongly is right. It doesn't necessarily mean if that person who feels more strongly that also has, 6 data points to support their opinion is right if the other person doesn't. I have come to believe that everybody is definitely entitled to their own perspective. And that's what's shaping whether or not they think something is the right decision or the wrong decision. It's also built off of their moral compass and their ethics. But there are people that do things that I would absolutely never do. And I'm not talking about, let's take out, causing harm on people and doing, clearly bad things that are, not respectful of another human being, not okay in that respect. I'm talking about somebody making a decision about something that they feel very strongly for and they feel is right. They're entitled to that perspective and I'm entitled to mine. So I guess I don't think there's any right answer, wrong answer, but I think we have to know ourselves, understand ourselves, recognize what our core values are and how that shapes our view of the world around us, because that's how we are going to make decisions that are right for us, is when it's in line with our core values, which is honestly what I do in coaching people. Is who are you? I can't tell you what to do as a coach or a mentor for you. Help you figure out what is the right decision for you.
So, thank you for bringing that up, and I'd love to kind of transition a little bit into that with your corporate career. We focused a lot on your time in the Army, and there's so much more that we could dive into there that I think would be amazing, especially these learning to build the confidence to make those on the fly decisions. How did you transition into the corporate world and then marketing, and then talk to us a little bit about what you do in your own company?
Yeah. So I transitioned out of the Army and into the biotech space by way of an MBA. So I went to Indiana University. It was also a way of me procrastinating on figuring out what exactly I was going to do in my next phase of my career, because I didn't know. And I had been doing some soul searching, but nothing was coming to me and nothing quite felt right. So went back, got my MBA, because I knew at a minimum there were dots I wanted to connect from a business acumen standpoint, that and getting an MBA for me would help me figure that out and then jump onto that path. So through my MBA program, we interview at all sorts of companies and industries when you're in a full-time program. And I didn't feel a fit for many industries. I definitely knew marketing was right for me. It fit my personality. I liked the strategy aspect of it. It just fit. But from an industry standpoint, through trial and error, I found the pharmaceutical space, which I kind of define as, there's like big pharma, which is where I started in my career, but I then found my way to the biotech startup side because that really fit me better. I'm not a big pharma kind of marketer. I like to, the things I learned in the Army served me best in a startup environment where you've got to wear multiple hats, where you've got to roll your sleeves up, where you have to be competent and capable, but you also have to recognize how important your role is in helping others around you. So, you're swimming in your lane, but you're also cheering on those swimming in the lanes next to you. And also culture. So culture was a really big factor for me as I continued in my career. And I changed companies multiple times because I had opportunities that were coming to me that I wanted to pursue, but I also was making decisions on those opportunities, less about what it was I was doing or what my title was or pay, and more about the culture and feeling that this was an organization and environment that are aligned with my core values. So in the coaching and work I do with individuals, it is helping them, as I mentioned before, recognize their core values and then be able to operate in their existing company and step into their own confidence as an individual, which then allows them to naturally develop their leadership skills. And so then the other prong of what I do is work with these C-suite and more senior leaders because what is more important to a senior leader than culture? I would argue nothing, because if you don't have the right culture, then you don't have empowered people. And if you don't have empowered people, you're never going to get their best work. You're never going to get them collectively to make the right impact on the organization and move the business forward. So culture for me now is at the heart of what I do, but it was always part of my decision-making post-MBA and honestly, my happiness and satisfaction in my job. It was, you can put a finger on it. If the culture was good, your employees are happy and you're going to get their best work. And if their culture is not good and it's toxic, you're going to see erosion of, the cohesion of the company. You're going to see loss of top talent, and the business is going to suffer. So that's kind of how what I've learned in the biotech space has now informed what I do for individuals as well as those senior leaders.
Yeah, and I would almost venture to say that when you start influencing the culture, it's the first time that you go from an individual to you're now kind of connecting them all in a certain direction. It's no longer just about helping an individual go a certain direction. You have to make the bridge to a culture, to a group dynamic, in order to get the whole thing to begin working in a certain direction. So how do you kind of begin to make that shift and begin to help an entire culture move in a certain direction versus just helping an individual kind of find their goal?
Well, I think the path to that is actually fairly similar. So we talked about, I help individuals figure out their core values and then operate in accordance with those core values and find opportunities that align to them. In an organization, you usually go to any company website, especially in the biotech space, they've got core values and their mission and their vision, and it's plastered on their website. But how many companies actually put into action those values? And not many do, which is why culture is often something that people kind of check a box on at a senior level. They even hire somebody often that says this person is the head of people and culture. That's a new name for human resources. And every time somebody has a head of people and culture, to me, it's a giant warning flag that they have now taken what should be inherent to every leader's role, which is taking care of their people and establishing, cultivating a strong culture, and they've given it to an individual. And so when you start to do that, people say, well, that's not my job, that's their job. Their job responsibility is people and culture. So as a leader, my job is what? My job is the functional responsibilities and, driving the results. But when you are just focusing on results, you are losing that personal aspect of what you're supposed to be doing. So in working with companies, it's understanding what are the core values that the organization has or wants to have, and then how do those fall through with their actions, not just by giving somebody a title, but through the daily actions, the recognizing top talent and working to retain them, because you really have to work to retain top talent. They can sniff things out and they're going to be the first ones gone, and you don't want to lose your top talent. So there's all these different levers that leaders can pull, but it starts with what's our core values, and now how are we owning that as senior leaders all the way down to lower level managers, and how are our actions aligning with what we're talking about.
So how have these things kind of connected in your through these different spheres that you've worked in? Obviously the Army, the biotech sphere, and now in counseling. Like, how have these things kind of meshed in your experience? What have you been able to pull from one to the other, or how has one kind of prepared you for what you're doing today?
Yeah, I actually think they've each stepped, like it's been stepping stones for me. So the military, the West Point, the military experience was very much focused on being a leader. And, you know, when I was a logistics officer, I had, my biggest platoon was 80 soldiers, and we had all this logistics equipment. I didn't even drive most of the equipment. It wasn't my job. So do I need to know how to do an oil change on something? No, but I do need to know how to take care of my people, and I need to know how to give them purpose and, help them on that journey and build us all up together so we can accomplish our mission together. That is no different than in my marketing career in the biotech space, where marketing is the hub of the wheel. So you create the strategy, you in partnership with all these other functions, you're driving the bus, and everybody else has to get on that bus. And so there are organizations where, that I've been a part of, where culture was not keen on that, right? People were very happy working in siloed areas, and it was very toxic. And so, clear, needless to say, I didn't stay around at those companies very long. So there's a lot of bad leadership examples I have from the military, from the corporate world, where I got sick of those bad leadership examples. I want to help create great leaders, great leadership abilities, and then on really strong, high-performing cultures that are built on taking care of your people. And so they all actually do tie together, and which is why I really focus on the biotech space. I'm not limited to it, because strategy and marketing is such an important part of creating the right vision going forward for the products, for the company, especially in the startup space. So they all do tie together very well. And sometimes it's hard to pick where I want to focus, because there's so many ways that if you're passionate about leadership and strategy and culture, you can really just help bring people together on the same page. So they fit together very well. But there's a lot going on, but it is very core to companies thriving, in my opinion.
So I love that you talked about there are so many things that you could focus on in whenever you start to coach a leader or a group or something like that there are so many things involved in it. But I wonder if you could perhaps help me understand what would be something that I call and I call it an eternal truth, is something that anyone can start doing today, and there's not necessarily a cap on, it's not necessarily, oh, you've done this for a year, you've reached this, and now you need to find something else to do. This is something that, regardless of where you are on the leadership spectrum or how long you've been doing it, this is something that you can start doing today and learn to get better at what you're doing. Is there anything that you've kind of picked up on in your career that, regardless of the level of leader that you're talking to, regardless of the type of company, this is something that everyone can learn to do better and to start improving their life and improving their company?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with like improving your life, because I think if you improve your life, and you're working on, you're focusing on yourself, you're naturally going to see all those desires that you have start to build up, and I'll give a little more context to that. I mean, what I would say, my number one thing, and I didn't mention it just yet, when I transitioned out of my MBA and into the biotech space, I had a crisis of confidence. So I had been very confident and capable in the Army, because that's, I was built up at West Point, and I knew what success looked like. I knew how to operate. I became very good at operating in that kind of paradigm. And then when I went back and got my MBA, I felt very insecure around all these smart people. And do I belong? I was having trouble in my finance class. It was like all these, a shock to my system of things I was doing. And I struggled with my own self-esteem, my self-confidence. And that presented itself in different ways. So for me, when I was in the biotech space and just getting going, I had a stutter. I turned bright red in front of senior leaders when I would present. I was, very unsure of myself. And as a result, I didn't necessarily make the best career choices, or I didn't advocate for myself well. It wasn't until I kind of hit rock bottom in that journey and started to build myself up that I was able to see my self-confidence go back up, and not in an ego and arrogant way, but just in a like, this is me, and I'm proud of who I am, and I may be, quirky and this or whatever, but like, I'm also, all these great things, and I'm proud of it. I don't shy away from it. And so when I started to step into that, my career took off. And so I like to say, to people who want to, because I work with high performers, I got 8 promotions in 12 years. I went from associate product manager all the way up to vice president, head of marketing. And that wasn't because, that I was following on anybody's coattails. I was doing me. I learned to be me and really embrace what I had to offer and enjoy the process. And my career just took off. So the one thing people can really do to help themselves to get on that journey is to listen to their inner narrative, because your inner narrative is going to tell you, we often are our harshest critics, especially high performers. We are judging ourselves the most. And maybe it's fear-based, maybe there's other drivers there, but recognizing your inner narrative and what you say to yourself is so important, because you can't change your inner narrative unless you start to listen to it. So something, there's a lot of work that can be done to help that. I'm also a big proponent of therapy, professional support to help you get to, the things that might be causing that inner narrative that may not be very positive, but it's recognizing also limiting beliefs. And that is very important for leaders. And I especially see that with women that get into a leadership role and they think, oh, I don't belong here, or, maybe I don't know how they just insecurities. And so recognizing your inner narrative can help you uncover your limiting beliefs, and then being able, with the right support, different modalities, therapy, and other things we can talk about, that work for you as an individual, will help you get through that. And it's almost like you're reborn. And so I was reborn through my work that I've been doing over the last, 5+ years. And it's allowed me to figure out, what career change is right for me. But it goes very much hand in hand, I believe, with leadership, because you have to be authentic. You have to be authentic to who you are. But if you don't know who you are, then how can you be authentically you? But as a leader, being authentic helps build trust from those around you. And that will really help you in order to, lead the organization.
I would absolutely love for you to get into that a little bit more. But first, I would love, perhaps, could you give some examples of what might be some limiting beliefs, and then what would be the alternative to that? How would someone perhaps either break those down or rewrite them, or how would they go from a limiting belief to an empowering belief? And then what does that look like to then begin boosting your own confidence and boosting your, like you said, your being self-assured in your leadership? How would one start to work through that?
Well, let's take imposter syndrome, for example. People hear, oh, imposter syndrome. Well, what is that? And as I've spoken to people, the vast majority of people, I believe, experience imposter syndrome at one point or another, climbing the corporate ladder. So maybe they were really great, strong individual contributors, but then they get into a role where, maybe they have a seat at this big table and they see these people around them that are very senior, which was what kind of happened to me, where I developed that stutter and turning bright red. And you start to think, I don't actually belong at this table. Maybe I have clients who've actually said this to me, and prospective clients that have said, I don't know how I got this role. Like, I think they might have accidentally, entrusted me to step into this role, and here I am. And now I'm terrified that I'm not going to be able to be successful. So if you uncover that and you unwrap that a little bit, peel back the onion, you recognize that people are not actually believing in themselves. And you've got to recognize, who you are, appreciate who you are. But there are a lot of signs around you. And that's what I work with individuals that I coach in building up their confidence and pulling back those limiting beliefs. There's often at least one person around you in your job that really believes in you. Whether it's the person who hired you in, whether it's a peer, whether it's even somebody you mentor. Sometimes you can have imposter syndrome and be senior and mentoring somebody. People around you really do look up to you and respect what you're doing, and they're giving you signs that you're pretty awesome. And I'm a big believer, like, most people are pretty awesome, but it's those of us that are the harshest critics of ourselves that we don't recognize that, where we discount what they say. And so we replace it instead with our own narrative. Oh, well, so-and-so, thinks I'm great at what I'm doing. I deserve to be here. But maybe they don't really know that I don't know everything about this job. So I'll say, like, imposter syndrome, people get promoted into something. You don't necessarily have to know everything about your job. It's more similar to being in a leadership role in the Army. You've got to recognize, one, how to get the answers and how to be resourceful, but also recognize that sometimes it's okay to not know. And that's why you work really well with those around you, because people should collaborate and help lift each other up. And the goal often, when you step into a role, is to have room to grow. And so you want to take a job and with the right management team, that allows you to grow into that role, and that they're trusting you and they're guiding you and they're not letting you flail out there. So it's important to recognize that you should give yourself grace, and to pull that back also into leadership. When you're a leader, you should be hiring people, not just based off of experience. Oh, they did X number of years, doing this job. We can hire them to do this. Well, first of all, you're not going to hire me to do something I've done for 10, for five of the last years, because I've got great potential to do more. So why do I want to go take a job of something I've done over and over and I've proven? So as a leader, you've really got to when you want to attract and retain top talent, give them room to grow and support them, coach them, mentor them. And sometimes there are mistakes that are going to happen, but if they're in a safe environment, they're going to grow as a result, and you're going to see them blossom. And so recognizing that as a leader is as important as being that growing leader that is facing some limiting beliefs or things that are no longer serving them. So you got to overcome that, but then also be the person who is supportive of people and lift them up with you.
It reminds me of something you've probably heard of it, called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more you learn about something, oftentimes the less confident you become about what you know. Mm-hmm. And so there's this paradoxical effect of, like, the people who are actually really good at something, they don't talk much because they realize how little they know, even because they've worked on it so long. And then you have the people who know very little about it, are very confident because they have no idea how big the field actually is. And so have the people who know very little who are spouting off, but the people who have been in it have no confidence in themselves, and you get this, like, paradoxical effect. Yeah. How would you suggest for someone who's watching this to kind of begin to develop themselves as a leader, to begin to I've heard it said that the heart comes before the skill, and that you need to develop the heart to be able to lead before you even develop the skills like the technical skills of leadership. And so what would you say, like, how would someone go about kind of starting that process or working on themselves? What would be a good place for them to start to begin building the heart behind the leader?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely subscribe to that, although I might have a little bit of a different perspective. I mean, I think the heart is understanding you, right? When we talk about, loving, how can you love other people if you don't love yourself? You've got to, how can you lead from the heart? And I actually write a newsletter on LinkedIn, which is called Leading from the Heart. You've got to follow your heart and believe in yourself, because that will open you up to then accepting and appreciating everybody around you, versus, if you're not leading from, if you're insecure or untrusting as a leader, then you're not going, that's probably stems from some sort of insecurity about yourself, or whether it's imposter syndrome or, what have you. If you're in that role and you have a lot of fear and insecurity, which is a closed heart, in my opinion, then you're never going to be able to open up the hearts of those around you through your leadership, because you're not demonstrating that. You might not even realize it. But so I think that is very important, is leading with your heart. My difference in opinion from what you said around leadership is, there's the question, are leaders born or are they made? And I think I did a poll on LinkedIn, and, a lot of people responded to that. And most people, the vast majority of people, said it's a combination of both. So I don't quite know if I had to pick one answer, I don't believe the answer of, are they made, are they born, or are they a combination of both? I don't believe the answer is just they are made. I believe leaders have some sort of innate inclination to being leaders. It is, whether it's a personality thing, because it doesn't matter if you're an extrovert or an introvert, but I do think more, fewer introverts are naturally inclined to be leaders, just because you're in front of people and engaging a lot. But it's, maybe there's a combination of your personality, your upbringing, your belief systems, that have you want to be a leader. But I'll tell you this, I mean, I was, a captain of my softball team in high school. I was a co-president of my class. I mean, I never received any leadership training. So how did that happen? I was inclined, I was good at softball, and I was put in a position, and, I learned, on the fly. But I wanted to do it, right? Like, I didn't have to run for co-president of my high school class. I wanted to. So there's an innate component that I believe is always there. And then there's also the training elevates you. So that's no different than playing a sport, having an innate ability to be a very fast, miler on the track, right? You're not, you have to practice, you have to learn, proper form, and then it taps into your innate ability. And so to bring that back to the corporate world, for example, most people are not ever taught how to be leaders. Most people don't even know what leadership is. They can't actually define it. When they are asked what leadership is, or, what leadership means to them, they say, oh, I'm this type of leader. Like, I'm a servant leader, I'm this. And those are just, catchphrases, whatever. It's not real leadership. It should be based off of who you are and your heart and your innate, abilities that are brought out as a leader, that then, and it's like your unique leadership imprint. And so I think there's a combination there that's very important that people should step into. But again, it starts with recognizing who you are, your values, and building upon that, because you want to be a leader, and you want to invest in that. And then a tangible way to do that is get the right coach. Get the right coach, read the right, read books. There's so many free resources out there. Even if you don't want to invest in the right coach, you can learn a lot, and also take notes and recognize and journal on it of great leadership or not so great leadership examples you see every day. And then that creates a repository of what type of leader you want to be when you're in that role.
Do you think that it's best for someone to look at the organization and see what kind of leader that organization needs? Or do you think it's best to start by looking inside you and seeing what kind of leader you are meant to be? and then move outward from there?
I think the latter, because culture is created by people in an organization, and if you are, leadership is very personal to you, and so your leadership style is probably not going to change all that much from one company to another. So if you're developing your sense of leadership and who you are as a leader based off of the culture of this particular company, then when you go to another company, maybe it doesn't quite feel right. Or so you can still be true to yourself as a leader by looking within and learning what feels right for you. And if you come out of that and realize, hey, you know what, I'm this type of person. These are my, because it's built off your core values, and those core values don't align with the organization, or the organization doesn't really appreciate or reward or recognize those values you have, then it's not the right fit. And I'm not saying for people, oh, you just go quit your job. What I'm saying is to be your true self and your most authentic self and really thrive as a leader, you've also got to be in the right culture. If you're very senior, you can affect that change, which is why I love working with more senior people, because they can set the culture, which then will trickle down, and people will be able to feel empowered and step into their own leadership. So definitely leadership should be your style, who and true to who you are and your values. And it shouldn't, those core values aren't changing every time you change a company.
Okay, awesome. That's something that I've been personally trying to figure out on my own, because running my own business and developing even as a father, and trying to get better at that, understanding which way do I go? Do I become the leader that they need, or do I learn the type of leader that I am and flourish there? This is something that we could go ahead.
Yeah, Brett, just real quick on that. When you say like what leader they need, maybe it's not what type of leader they need, or what kind, maybe it's an actual need. It could be what does this organization need, as far as, for example, some companies, they lack collaboration, or there's an environment where people don't feel heard. So it's not about you being a leader who makes people feel heard. It's about being a leader that's true to you. And something that's important to you is to create the venue for people to feel heard. So there's probably a need that, regardless of your leadership style, you can still address. So maybe it's flipping that.
But learning to address that need in the way that I am meant to is kind of what you're saying.
Yes, true to you, being true to you.
Okay. Well, this is definitely something we could continue talking for probably several more hours, but we are coming up to the end of our time. So could you help talk to the audience about some places they might go to learn more about this, learn more about what you do, be able to perhaps contract your services, or different resources that they can go to learn more about this sort of thing and develop themselves as leaders?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, I'm on LinkedIn, Christiana Cioffi. I post pretty regularly, and I have a newsletter that speaks to this. And if you're interested in my services, you can easily reach out to me there. I also have a website, christianachoffi.com. And on my website, I created something specifically for veterans. It came up from, within setting up my business, a need to help veterans establish their brand. So I have something on there that's relevant for anybody, but it is geared specifically towards veterans. It's called The Power of Your Brand. So they can go to christianachoffi.com/veterans and watch a video around how to create your brand, as well as a guidebook, playbook to help create that. And so I think it's important, especially for veterans that are transitioning or went through something similar that I did, to really understand who it is you are and recognize the great things about what you've learned in your transferable skills. Something we didn't quite, talk about, but in my own self-discovery of coming out of my, confidence crisis, if you will, I've done a lot of meditation. So I actually had breast cancer. You mentioned that at the very beginning. I was diagnosed when I was 36 years old, right after my 36th birthday, and it rocked my world. And it wasn't until the year, the following months, within a year, I sought help as a therapist on a regular basis. I was diagnosed with clinical depression, anxiety, and a form of PTSD. And that was my mental, emotional, spiritual rock bottom. And from there, I was able to really invest in myself. And so I found ways that worked for me without taking medication because I didn't want to numb the pain. I wanted to figure out what is happening so that I can rewire my brain essentially. So I do subscribe to different types of meditation, specifically guided meditations that help with that. And I love Dr. Joe Dispenza and his work, which is, it's not even really spiritual. It's more, I guess, closest to Buddhist, if you will, but it's more quantum physics and law of attraction and neuroscience all mixed into one. And it allows you to uncover through meditation different things that are holding you back so that you can actually be the owner of your own future and create it. And so I've used that in my own journey to figure out the right path for me and stay in touch with who I am. And then the last thing I'll say is another resource for veterans, specifically the Heroic Hearts Project, heroicheartsproject.org, I believe is their website. And it's a nonprofit for veterans helping with PTSD, and it involves psychedelics if that's of interest to anyone. Having an open mind myself, I found that was a very recent, but also very important part of my journey to release things that were holding me back, way back in my subconscious. And there's a lot of resources specifically for veterans, but that type of program is not just for veterans. It's for anybody who has anything that they want to in their subconscious and, feel stuck, anything like that. I encourage them to research different types of psychedelics for their own healing. And of course, with professional therapy is a huge help if you find the right person for you.
Yes, that's awesome. The rewiring is something that has been huge in my own experience as well. And specifically with the psychedelics, we have I actually interviewed one of the first people that I interviewed who's a therapist that works with psychedelics as well. And so for the viewers, you can go back and look through the list of podcasts. You'll find I think several different people who have touched on psychedelics. So there's that resource, but also I would love to perhaps continue the conversation another time. This is something that, like our conversation today, we had to keep it to an hour, but there's so much that we could talk about. Felt like we had to kind of rush through some of this stuff that I would love to dwell on: your time in the military, your time in the biotech world, and your time coaching. But it's been great having you on. Your insight about leadership, especially, and about developing yourself and developing the type of leader that you're meant to be, so that you can then develop the culture for the people that you are leading. And I think you had some amazing insights, and I would love to do it again sometime. But thank you so much for coming on and for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brett. I'd love to come back if you want to have me. It's been a great discussion. I appreciate all the viewers.